All right, I would like to do a set review of Ravnica Allegiance. We just got the full spoiler very recently. I guess that depends on when you're listening to this video. If you're listening to this video in 2024. We got the spoiler 5 years ago or more. Uh, but assuming you're watching it fairly quickly after it comes out, then we got the spoiler pretty recently. I'm recording this the day after we got the spoiler. Anyway, point is I'm doing a set review, and I'm going to be reviewing for limited and constructed. Constructed I mostly mean standard, but if something is important for another format, then I'll mention it for that format. I'm not necessarily going to give a grade to every card. Certainly every card I'm not going to discuss for every format either. Most of the cards are just clearly not going to have any impact on any kind of constructed format. Um, anyway, let's jump right in. We're going to start with white. First card is Angel of Grace. I'm not going to read every card either, but I will read this one. It's 5 mana for a 5/4 flash flying. When it enters the battlefield, damage it reduce your life total to less than 1, reduces it to 1 instead for the rest of the turn. And from your graveyard, you can play 6 and exile this to make your life total 10, regardless of what your life total currently is, although obviously you can't do this after losing. After your life total hits 0, you can't do it in response or anything unless you somehow haven't lost the game already due to some other effect. But anyway, yeah, obviously this is a complete bomb in limited. Just the 5 mana 5/4 flying is totally a bomb. Add in flash and it's extremely a bomb. The other abilities probably actually aren't that important in limited, particularly the lose the game one. Um, I guess it can come up, and certainly it's upside to have, but it's not going to be a huge deal. Um, the other one, if they somehow kill this, then you got to get some value. If they mill it, it gets milled somehow, you can get some value. But totally strong and limited, obviously. Constructed, yeah, I'm not so sure. 5 mana 5/4 flash flying is can be reasonable. It's very possible this card is good. But if we look at the other options that white decks already have at 5 mana, I'm not sure exactly that this is mostly Lyra. Is this what this is competing with? And I think you can only play, so many cards like this. So I might expect to see this in some small numbers. Maybe a deck that is playing more of a flash kind of theme. The flash ability helps here, but in general, you'd almost always rather have the Lyra in play. The lifelink, the first strike, and it's going to gain life for you. It's going to help you not lose the game anyway. So I'm not really seeing this push Lyra out. Maybe it can coexist a little bit, but my feeling is that this is probably not going to be a huge player in constructed, but I could well be wrong. I would not be surprised if it does see some significant play, and I'd be a little bit surprised if it sees actual no play. Flash is pretty significant. Angelic Exaltation, yeah, it wants you to have a creature that attacks by itself, but it also wants you to have a lot of creatures. Those things don't typically go together that well. I guess you can have a lot of creatures holding the ground and one evasive creature chipping in or something, but I don't actually see this card being very good. Obviously, there's going to be situations where it is good, but yeah, I'm not seeing it so much. I guess, let's see, if you just have a bunch of creatures on an otherwise stalemated board, it's also good there because you can just attack with one of them, it'll be huge. But I mean, such a situation, especially in constructed, isn't going to come up that much. But even in limited, I don't think it's going to be worth having this card slot in your deck. You'd just rather have it be some other, random creature or something. So I don't think this card's very good. Archway Angel, it's a gate payoff. We're going to see some other gate payoffs later. This one seems pretty weak to me, even in limited. Let's say you have 2 gates. You gain 4 life from this. 6 mana 3/4 flying when it ETBs gain 4 life. is kind of marginal. And how likely are you to actually have two gates? Well, if you have like five gates in your deck, you're reasonably likely to have two gates when you cast this. You're probably not going to have more. Five gates is already above the average that you're going to expect to have in most decks. So you really need to have a lot of gates for this to be worth it. You know, we want you to have three or four in play. And it's just kind of expensive and clunky, and you can play it sometimes, but it's not that great. Let's move down to Arrestor Zeal. Arrestor Zeal is just a nice 1 mana combat trick. Compares pretty well, I think, to Mighty Leap. Usually when you're casting Mighty Leap as an instant, mostly the flying doesn't matter, and it's just the +2/+2, and this gets you that, because it's in combat already. And then when you want the flying to matter, usually it's because you're killing them, and you're casting it as a sorcery. Well, you want to cast it before they block anyway, so that it's evasive. The one place where this really loses out against Mighty Leap is if you're trying to use it to block a flyer, which, yeah, okay, you can't do as well. But on the other hand, that's usually not the best use for Mighty Leap to start with. And costing one less is a big deal. 1 mana combat tricks are a lot better than more expensive combat tricks. So I think this is a pretty good combat trick and or way to push through the last bits of damage. Having said that, you can only have so many combat tricks, of course. If we look at Bring to Trial, it's obviously not going to be good enough for Constructed. Arrestor Zeal also, obviously. The only constructed card that we've seen so far in white was Angel of Grace, the first card. Bring to Trial, exile target creature with power 4 or greater. Well, yeah. In a draft, neither white nor blue really have any. Actually, they don't have any commons or uncommons that have power 4 or greater. They have some rares, obviously. Black has like one common, red has a few, and green has several. So it could be really good, but it also might be pretty close to blank. You probably still main deck one in draft, but you're not going to be super happy about it, and definitely be prepared to board them in or out. In sealed, it's somewhat better because your opponent's almost always going to be playing at least one big creature or two if they're bombs or something. So in sealed, you're definitely going to want to main deck one, maybe two of these even. But in draft, I'd prefer to leave them in my sideboard, but I'm not going to be too upset if I have to main deck one. Let's next move to Civic Stalwart, obviously another limited only card. I feel like we've gotten this card a few other times with different creature types in different sets. Pumps your whole team for a turn. Yeah. So in white black, so there's two guilds of every color in the set. There's white black in this set, and then there's also white blue. In white black, Orzhov, the mechanic is Afterlife, which is going to give you some number of little 1/1 flyers. This being able to pump those is reasonably nice, and if you're an aggressive deck, this is reasonably nice, but I don't know how aggressive the set's going to be. I think there are, like I said, all of your creatures are kind of small, so that's kind of nice. The white-blue deck seems to kind of be in a Flyers deck, which is kind of the classic blue-white limited deck. Skies, and pumping a team full of Flyers can get a lot of damage in, and then this can trade for something on the ground. So I think this is very playable, and almost all your white decks you're going to actually end up playing it, but it's not premium. But I think it might even be a little bit better in this set than normal. Concordia Pegasus, 2 mana 1/3 flyer. Those are generally good. There's enough 1/1 flying spirits that would make it maybe a little bit better than normal, but on the other hand, I don't know, some of the other things in the set make me think it might not be quite as good as normal. It's probably about as good as it normally is, which is totally fine, playable, but not super exciting. Exposed to Daylight, sideboard card. Constructed worthy, probably not. There tends to be a better disenchant than this. The scry one is something though, so maybe. I don't have a great recollection of what disenchants there are in the standard format. 3 mana is kind of a lot though. Forbidding Spirit, yeah, the double white might be a little bit tough. And then, yeah, ghostly prisoning them for a turn. Well, 3 mana 3/3 is already just totally good enough in standard. So a little bit of upside, despite it being double white. Did I say in standard? I meant in draft. In limited, it's not good enough in standard. As much as my Chloras played gnarled mass back in the day. Um, anyway, in limited, it's just totally good body. So this is going to be a totally solid card there, if not fantastic. And I don't think it's going to be particularly fantastic. Um, in constructed, I'm not going to totally rule this out. So first glance, it really doesn't look constructed worthy. But if there is a blink deck, and I think there might be a blink deck, um, being able to blink this in repeatedly and tax your opponent might be good. Now you have to blink like multiple times per turn to really stop them from attacking. And of course, this thing can get killed. So I really doubt that it's constructed worthy, but it's at least something I'd keep in mind for standard. Hazada Officer. This kind of calls back to the Civic Stalwart, but it only pumps one creature and it has one less toughness. I think in general this is a little bit better because costing one less is a big deal. Um, on the other hand, for some of the other reasons, I think the other card is a little bit better than normal in this set, maybe, despite us not having a ton of tokens in white, which sometimes it does have as a theme. This is a perfectly serviceable limited card, but nothing special. Hero Precinct 1. Yeah, this makes 1/1 humans when you cast multicolored spells. Um, in limited, it's fine, but not special. You're going to have a few multicolored spells. Particularly in this set, you'll probably be able to trigger it once or twice a game if you get it early, at which point, if you trigger it twice, it's quite good. If you trigger it once, it's still pretty good. 2 mana for a 2/2 and a 1/1. But it's not, super special. In constructed, the first thought that you have is in modern, where there's the humans deck, and a lot of the humans that humans plays are multicolored, but I'm not entirely sure that you can really fit this into that deck so well because, well, there's a decent number of monocolored humans in that deck. You have, the one drops. You have Thalia's Lieutenant. You have Thalia itself. You have Kitesail Freebooter. If you're playing with the 3 mana 2/3 from the core set, that helps you find other things with power 2 or less. So there's a decent number of monocolored things. Sometimes you're vialing your creatures in, and this doesn't work with that because you need to cast the spell. So I'm not entirely sure. If we think about what multicolored humans there actually are, there's Meddling Mage, Mantis Rider. I'm sure there's a few others, but it's escaping my mind. I haven't really played humans that much, and I've played against it some, but not a ton. I haven't played a lot of Modern recently. Obviously, making extra humans is going to pump your what is the name of the one drop in that deck that gets +1/+1 whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control? And then the Thalia's Lieutenant has the same ability. Or you can Thalia's Lieutenant afterward to pump all your 1/1s. So it's not nothing, and it's probably worth at least thinking about. But yeah, I somehow don't think it's going to be good enough for that deck. In standard, we've had some kind of white weenie token decks. For the most part, those have had too many mono white spells for this, but it's possible at some point that you could take advantage in some way of some multicolored spells. If you made it a little more Boros-y, I guess maybe blue whitey, but probably Boros because that's going to help you have extra tokens. Like if you play this and then you play heroic reinforcements a couple turns later, that's not nothing. So we'll look about it there, but my gut feel is that it's probably not going to do a ton in older formats. Might be doing something more in standard, and it's just okay in limited. You're basically always going to run it, but it's unlikely to be just totally fantastic, especially because after turn 2 it's not so great. Anyway, let's move on to Impassioned Orator, which I think is actually almost as good in limited. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under you control, you gain a life. Um, yeah, it's easier to have creatures enter the battlefield under your control than it is to cast a multicolored spell, especially in limited. Um, so you're going to gain more life than creating 1/1s. Obviously, a 1/1 is a lot better than gaining a life. So I expect Hero is still better than Impassioned Orator, even in limited, but in limited it's going to be close. In constructed, the hero has got a lot more prospects. But I will say in constructed, do keep in mind Impassioned Orator. Right now we only, I think, have one life gain payoff in Ajani's Pridemate, but we have enough things now that help you gradually gain life between the 1-mana artifact that gains you a life every upkeep, the 2-mana 1/3 artifact creature that you get to pick a color, and then whenever you cast a card of that color, you gain life. You set it to white here. There's a number of little like 1/1 life linkers. So there's a lot of things that can gain you life in small increments in standard. If we get more payoffs beyond just a Johnny's Pridemate, like if they reprinted Archangel of Thune or something, then this would be a card to at least think about, because it's gonna trigger your life gain things. Kind of similar to Soul Sisters in Modern, but obviously 1-mana 1/1 with that ability in constructed is going to be better than a 2-mana 2/2. Not in limited though. Uh, yeah, so Justiciar's Portal blinks a creature, and then that creature has to be one of your creatures. But it blinks one of your creatures, and then that creature gets first strike until end of turn. In limited, you can kind of use this as a combat trick, which is more going to come up if you have a creature that's tapped. It's a bit dangerous to try to ambush this way, but you can do it. You more wanting to use this with enter the battlefield triggers. I'm not really sure that there are enough in this limited format, but maybe there are. I'm not sure. It also could be a player if there is a big enter the battlefield trigger deck in standard. I'm not exactly sure if that's going to work or what that's going to look like, but I could see it happening in the standard format, particularly with some kind of aristocrat-y deck. So there's some Afterlife cards that work with that, but also some cards with ETB triggers, and just being able to re-trigger that at some point, this might be worth playing. Night of Sorrows. Yeah, I think even with Afterlife of One, this is a little bit lackluster and limited. Like if you got a 5-mana 3/3 that came with a 1/1 flyer, that card would be okay but not great. This can block an additional creature each combat, but yeah, I just think this is going to be a little bit too bad stats-wise to be great, but it's probably playable at some moments. Basically, I want more out of my 5-drop than that. A Lumbering Battlement, 4/5 Vigilance for 5. When it enters the battlefield, you get to exile any number of non-token creatures you control. I guess +2/+2 for each card exiled with it. So this can be a huge Vigilance creature, and you don't risk just permanently losing your creatures, because whenever this leaves the battlefield, they re-enter, right? This is the card, if there is a standard deck that is going to be ETB based, this kind of blink or flicker deck, I expect that this card is going to be a big player in that, because you can play this, you have a huge creature for as long as you want to keep this in play. When it leaves play, which you should probably have at least some ways to make that happen, but obviously could also just leave play from your opponent removing it. When it leaves play, then you get to re-trigger all the ETB triggers from all the other cards that you left with. And in the meantime, you have this huge creature. Um, in limited, it seems great because most decks, well, if your opponent's going super wide, then it's just okay, and it's just a 5 mana 4/5 vigilance is already okay again in that spot. If the board is a little more clogged, this is huge, and because it's vigilant, they're going to have to deal with it, and then you get your stuff back anyway. It's not very easy to deal with. There aren't that many cards that really deal with big creatures efficiently in this set compared to others. So I think this is quite a good card. Obviously very good and limited, but I think it's one to watch out for in constructed as well. Next, Minister of Obligation. This card looks really good and limited. You're going to be able to trade it off and get 2/1/1 flyers. It's almost a little bit Lingering Souls-esque, which makes me wonder if it's good enough for standard even. And I think it might be. You do have to worry a little bit more about it getting exiled in the standard and your opponent not caring about a 2/1 in standard. So, not totally sure that it's going to make it in standard, but I wouldn't entirely rule it out. And it looks just excellent. You're going to be able to trade it off in limited most of the time, or chump block with it and get 2/1/1 flyers. It's just going to be a very, very solid, like a B card in the limited format. Prowling Caracal, we've seen a million times before. It's a fine card in limited, nothing to write home about. These cards tend to block better than you might normally realize. I will also say there seems to be a bit less stuff that punishes 1 toughness in this set than there are in a lot of others, so I think this is going to be slightly better, but obviously there are 1/1 flyers, so there are some things that deal with this, so do keep that in mind. Rally to Battle reminds me of a card from Shadows over Innistrad block. I think it was called Tenacity, that gave all your creatures +1/+1 lifelink and untapped them. This one doesn't give them the lifelink, but it gives them +1/+3. Had the same mana cost, right? 4 mana is pretty expensive for a combat trick. Your opponent's going to be able to play around this fairly often. You can make an attack and then either use it on offense or on defense, but it's going to be hard to get more than a 2-for-1 out of it. To even get a 2-for-1 out of this, I think, because your opponent reasonably playing well is going to be able to play around it. So I'm not super convinced by this card. I'm sure there's going to be spots where it's fine. It's definitely a card that you need to be thinking about in the gameplay in the limited format, because if your opponent does attack with 4 mana up like this, there isn't like a divine verdict, but there is this card, and so especially if they're attacking with a lot of cards, do think about that, and try to make him turn it into just like they're going to be able to use it to kill one of your creatures, but if they're only killing one of your creatures and saving their creature with this, they're 1-for-1ing you basically. 4 mana for a 1-for-1 is just generally not that great. So this is a playable card, but I'm not very enthused about it, and I really would prefer not to play it. Resolute Watchdog is kind of weird. 1 mana 1/3 defender is just so bad, and being able to sacrifice it to give another one of your creatures indestructible also does not excite me at all. This is about unplayable and limited. In constructed, there might be some kind of a wall deck. I guess there kind of might be a wall deck in the limited format too if you're going super deep, although I don't entirely believe it. So I don't think this is very good basically either way. I could see if the wall deck actually happens, it has more of a constructed home. We'll see the card that enables that a little bit later. Sentinel's Mark, yeah, so 2 mana for +1/+2 and Vigilance with Flash. If you can use it as a combat trick, and actually win a combat based on it, then the +1/+2 and Vigilance sticking around is pretty nice. It has Addendum, which means if you cast this thing that you can normally cast as an instant as a sorcery, you get some bonus. In this case, it gets lifelink until end of turn. That does not seem worth it to me in almost any circumstance. Really want to be getting, winning combat with this thing, other than more than anything else. As a combat trick that sticks around, I think those can be a bit underrated. So I'm not too down on this actually, but I also don't think it's great by any means. It's just another fine combat trick in the format, and has absolutely no place in Constructed, of course. Sky Tether, 1 mana quasi removal. Your opponent can't attack you, and the enchanted creature can attack you because it gets Defender, and it loses flying. I guess you could stick this on your own creature if you're really in on Defenders. I don't really see that though. Anyway, mostly is to play with the Skies deck. So blue-white wants to be a Skies deck. You don't really care about having a blocker, your opponent having a blocker on the ground because you're going to win through the air anyway. And then keeping them from attacking you, so you stick this on a big creature and or a flyer to get it out of the way and let your flyers get through and win the race that way. So I think it's very playable in that deck and limited, although not amazing still, right? Because like you're usually not going to be that much of a Skies deck that you just have like 12 flyers in your deck. So you usually care a little bit that they have a blocker on the ground, but it's cheap, it's efficient, it's reasonable. Could it see play in Constructed? I I guess it could, but I don't know. Maybe in a control deck, um, like a creatureless control deck where you're never attacking them anyway. You don't care that they have it in play. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I will note about the enchantment removal spells in this deck. Enchantment-based removal, not removing enchantments. There are a number of bounce spells, flicker effects, blink effects, I guess, not flicker, um, and sacrifice things in the set, which let your opponents get some value. So that makes this card a bit worse. But I still think it's playable in a Skies deck. Smothering Tithe. This card is really weird. Whenever your opponent draws a card, they can pay 2, in which case nothing happens. But if they don't play 2, then you make a treasure. It's the only treasure card in the set, which surprises me. But I'm not really sure. It doesn't seem very good, but it's really hard to evaluate. Mostly them paying 2 mana to keep you off of 1 mana is probably not that good for them, but if they have excess mana, they can just do that, in which case this really almost does nothing. Or you can get a treasure, but what are you really doing with the treasures? You can't really build your deck around expecting. First of all, expect this is like basically unplayable in limited. In constructed, you need some reason that you can take a lot of advantage of a lot of treasure. I just don't really see. I don't really see what this card is doing, but it does interest me. I think it's basically unplayable in every format I can think of, but I wouldn't be too stunned if I'm wrong and there's some kind of a combo deck that can use it. Really quite strange and a little bit confusing to me. Right, let's move on to Spirit of the Spires. 4 mana 2/4 flyer is already just a totally good enough card and limited. Not a great card, but a good enough. Giving your other flying creatures +0/+1. Well, usually if you're attacking with your flyers, it doesn't matter that much to give them 1 more toughness. But sometimes you're blocking with your flyers. A lot of the times in this blue-white skies deck, you have large toughness creatures, and giving them an extra toughness helps them just block more stuff. So it's certainly, I think, going to be relevant in some cases. But then just a 2/4 flyer, it's already pretty good. So I think this card is very solid. Summary Judgment is kind of like a Gideon's Reproach, which was already a good card. You usually didn't use Gideon's Reproach on attacks. You can't use this on attacks when you're attacking. And then in the other case, you can use this as a sorcery speed, dealing 5 to a tapped creature, which, while not super amazing, not really what you'd love to be doing, yeah, you could easily cast this in either mode in limited. In constructed, I guess there's an outside chance this sees play, but I don't really believe in it. I think there's pretty much going to be better options. The Syndicate Messenger, 4 mana 2/3 flying, Afterlife 1, really solid card. Going to be one of the best white commons, I think. 4 mana 2/3 flying is already basically good enough. There was a card in Khan's block, Alabaster Kieran, that had Vigilance instead of Afterlife 1 on this card. Obviously, the more format there made it a bit better, and it was a pretty good card. I think Afterlife 1 is just a big upgrade, though. If you trade this off for a 3-drop, there's some kind of 3 mana 3/2, you're left with an extra 1/1 flyer that's almost a full 2-for-1. A 1/1 flyer is, a significant card here. So I think this is just quite a good card. If not amazing, but one of the better white commons. Probably not the best, but one of the better. Uh, Not close to good enough for constructed, though. 10th District Veteran, yeah, I'm not even interested in this in limited, really. Untapping another creature you control, there are some blue effects that kind of tap and lock down your creatures, and so this can get you out of that, but giving another creature that you control that's attacking basically vigilance as well. 3 mana 2/3, I mean, 3 mana 2/3 vigilance is already close to good enough, but this strikes me as like a C minus D plus card that I'd really rather not run, although I won't be totally embarrassed if I have to run it. Tithe Taker, pretty good in limited, just a 2 mana 2/1 with Afterlife 1. You're going to trade it off for something and get a spirit. That's pretty good. The taxing effect is more relevant for constructed, but I actually also don't think it's just amazing in constructed. Your opponent's going to see it coming, usually. You might be able to stop them from casting Settle the Wreckage on you for a turn, something like that, but I mean, it's a solid card, and it's definitely a solid card for the like white weenie decks in that deck. But that's more about it being a 2 mana 2/1 Afterlife one, where it gives you a little bit of Wrath protection, although not a lot of Wrath protection. But it's a solid card, but I don't think it's amazing in almost any format. Twilight Panther again reminds me of Mardu Hateblade from Khan's block. Yeah, the card is totally fine if you're white black. The second point of toughness I don't really see being relevant very often, but it might be. There's a few 1/1 tokens on the ground, I guess. Unbreakable Formation. Yeah, so in limited, this card's okay. You're almost always casting it as a sorcery, although I guess you can hold it up to counter a removal spell in an expensive way, or as a combat trick. But you're usually going to be casting it as a sorcery, where you got to put a 1/1 counter on all your things and give them vigilance until end of turn, as well as indestructible. Use it kind of like a very mini overrun. There was a card like this, Make a Stand, from Oath the Gatewatch, I believe. It was pretty similar. The card is okay. It's fine. This one gives a permanent counter, so it's going to be better, but not the most amazing card ever in limited. In constructed, this could be really what the white weenie decks are looking for. Effectively, you got to anthem your team. Obviously, all the creatures have to be out by the time you cast this to anthem your team. So it can work just as an anthem effect that way that lets you attack even into a board of bigger creatures because of the indestructible. So that's quite reasonable. And then against a control deck, you got to hold it up against a Wrath. Depending on the extent that Settle the Wreckage is still the primary Wrath in the format, it's a little bit awkward for this card. But if people start moving away from Settle the Wreckage to the other sweepers, this card starts looking a lot better and is potentially main deckable because of the sorcery speed effect, which is going to be reasonable against other creature decks. I mean, just antheming your team in this white weenie deck where you're playing 1-drop, 1-drop, 1-drop. You play, a 2-drop and a 1-drop, and then you play this or something. You give your team a big boost, and you're just crashing in. This could really see play. Venerated Loxodon had a similar kind of effect, but it was a 4/4. It cost 5, and you had to tap your creatures. This one you don't have to tap your creatures. You got to pump them. So I don't know. I could see this making waves in the standard format, but you really need to be going wide for it to do work. Could it see play? I've played some black-white tokens in Modern. Could it see play in that kind of a deck? I don't really see it. Yeah, I don't. It's just not efficient enough, I don't think. Not that you wouldn't, you know, appreciate the effect of the card sometimes, but I guess I have played Rootborn Defenses. I don't think that's very good though. Your sideboard spots are too precious, and yeah, no, I don't think it's good enough. Um, Watchful Giant, our last white card. It's a 6 mana 3/6 that makes a 1/1. Yeah, so 6 mana for a 4/7 would be fine. Splitting it off into a 3/6 and a 1/1 is. Um, I don't really know whether that's better or not. This is probably a playable card. My guess is it's a little bit worse. The 1/1 just doesn't seem that important to me. This is playable card, I guess, but you're usually going to be looking for better out of your 6 drops, I think. All right, that brings us to the end of white. I think I'm going to stop here and make a separate video for each color to try to keep this a little bit briefer. But thanks for watching, and come back for blue very soon.